Welcome to the 11th lecture in this course on self-knowledge. Today we'll explore a fascinating topic: the soul and the spirit, two concepts that are often confused with one another. We'll examine how they are made up, their current state, and the steps we must take to develop both our soul and our spirit. Let's begin by asking, what is the soul? The soul is a collection of virtues, powers, faculties, and forces that each of us carries in a latent state, hidden within our currently contaminated essence. We might assume we have a soul, but if we truly reflect on what the soul is, a set of virtues, powers, faculties, and forces, and then observe ourselves sincerely, we'll realize that these qualities are not yet present in us. Instead, we'll find within ourselves a multitude of psychological defects, negative traits and behaviors, that keep us in a state of spiritual poverty, weakness, lack of self-mastery, and ignorance. We are constantly overwhelmed by pain, sadness, fear, and so on. And so we come to understand that we do not yet have a soul. This explains why, as human beings, we are capable of committing cruel acts, causing harm to others, to nature, and even to ourselves. However, it's important to understand that all those virtues, powers, faculties, and forces exist within us in potential form. This means we have the capacity to develop the soul, to become the masters of these inner qualities. But in order to do so, we must engage in inner work. We must rescue our essence, which is currently trapped and conditioned by all our negative psychological states. So then, what are these virtues, powers, faculties, and forces that we gain through the development of the soul? Let's take a look. A virtue is the opposite of a defect. When you become aware of one of your psychological defects and eliminate it through the practice of psychological death, that conditioning dissolves. The conscious essence that was trapped within the defect is then freed. This essence is what is real and true within us. As a result, what was once a psychological defect, something that enslaved you and conditioned your thoughts, emotions, words, and actions, often harming both yourself and others, transforms into a conscious virtue. This virtue is now a force that understands, serves, and genuinely loves others as oneself. Every time a psychological defect is eliminated, a virtue is born in its place. For instance, the defect of betrayal becomes the virtue of loyalty. The thieving I transforms into the virtue of honesty. Anger turns into gentleness. Lust is transmuted into chastity. And so on. However, it's essential to understand that every defect has two poles: a positive and a negative, or an active and a passive expression. Why is this distinction important? Because we often fall into the trap of believing ourselves to be good, thinking we don't possess a certain defect simply because it isn't showing in its active form. We deceive ourselves into believing we are virtuous. Yet, at the same time, we may react with criticism or judgment toward others who do display that defect openly. This reaction often reveals that we carry the very same defect within us, though in a repressed state. It manifests not as action, but as aversion or disdain. This is why it is so important to observe defects in both their polarities, to understand them deeply, and to eliminate them. Only by doing this can we recover the authentic virtues of the soul. Now let's talk about the powers. As the Kundalini rises through the spinal cord, forming each of our internal bodies, we begin to receive specific spiritual powers. When the solar physical body is created, we gain the power to govern the gnomes and pygmies, elemental beings of the earth. With the creation of the solar vital body, we receive the ability to command the undines and nereids, the elementals of water. When the solar astral body is developed, we are able to consciously travel in the astral plane, visit any place or star, and enter the fifth dimension at will. We also gain the power to govern the salamanders of fire. By creating the solar mental body, we gain access to the mental world whenever needed, and we can make contact with the sylphs and sylphids, the elemental spirits of the air, and receive their wisdom. Finally, when the body of solar will is formed, we acquire the power to govern all of nature, which allows us to create even ourselves. Now let's look at the faculties. As we develop our soul, we also awaken spiritual faculties, which emerge through the activation of our internal senses or chakras. With each stage of initiation, certain faculties, latent in all human beings, are granted to us. Most people are unaware of these capacities or don't know how to use them consciously. These faculties include clairvoyance, clairaudience, polyvoyance, magical hearing, presentiment, telepathy, telemetry, intuition, the ability to communicate with the elementals of nature, and many others. It's important to understand that we are currently in a degenerated and fallen state, dominated by numerous psychological defects. These defects control much of our inner life because they have our consciousness trapped. For this reason, if we attempt to awaken and develop these faculties without first engaging in the inner work of freeing and purifying our consciousness, they will awaken in a negative way. That is, our psychological defects will take control of them, leading us to confusion, illusions, and serious spiritual errors. This is why it must be our own inner being, the divine spark within, who grants us the use of these faculties in the right time and in the right way as we advance in the elimination of our defects and the creation of our internal bodies. As we develop our soul, we also begin to awaken many inner forces. With genuine psychological and spiritual growth, these forces begin to gather and integrate around our being. And when that happens, we're able to accomplish things that even 1,000 people working together could not achieve. We gain physical strength, vitality, and power in our words. When someone develops strength in their speech, their words can penetrate directly into the consciousness of others. We also develop true willpower. There is already a considerable force within us, but we tend to misuse it, especially through the defect of anger, which drains and weakens us. So, as I mentioned earlier, all of this, these forces, this power, emerges and becomes integrated in us as we develop, or in other words, fabricate our soul. Let's now look at an important question. How is the soul fabricated? The soul is developed through the practice of the three factors for the revolution of consciousness: psychological death, spiritual birth, and sacrifice for humanity. Through psychological death, we save our energies, bring balance to our energy centers, and liberate the essence that is trapped within our psychological defects. Through spiritual birth, we create the existential bodies of the being. This takes place within the sacred sexual union between a man and a woman, using the sexual creative energy in a conscious and wise way. And through sacrifice for humanity, we share this knowledge with others selflessly. This generates the merits of the heart, which allow us to move forward in our inner work. These three factors are what allow us to break free from the mechanical cycle of ordinary life and initiate a true revolution of consciousness, so we can develop and eventually become the soul. Now, let's look at the steps needed to fabricate the human soul. The first step is to receive the objective knowledge, because only when we understand how to apply the three factors for the revolution of consciousness can we truly begin this inner work. But as the old saying goes, out of 1,000 who seek me, only one finds me. There are many people in the world who have a spiritual longing, they're searching for something deeper. But very few actually find the knowledge of the three factors, presented in a practical way that allows them to begin the real work of awakening their consciousness. Many become lost in endless concepts and spiritual theories and never recognize the one teaching that can truly help them make progress. And why does this happen? Because of karma. Some people received this knowledge in past lives but abandoned it. Others betrayed their divine mother. Some committed crimes against the Holy Spirit. Others are still seeking, but they don't even know what they're looking for. And because of that karmic debt, they lose the right to receive the knowledge for several lifetimes. So, to receive and assimilate the objective knowledge in a single lifetime is a real privilege, but it's only the first step in the fabrication of the soul. The second step is to begin practicing the three factors, because without practice, this knowledge is useless. It's not believing in it that changes us, it's putting it into action. But the truth is, very few people make that decision. Most who find the teaching stay stuck at the intellectual level. They take it as just another theory or idea, and they don't apply it to their lives. Why? Because of laziness, and because their personality pulls them back into their old habits. But if you make a super effort, especially by helping others, you'll receive a force that drives you to truly begin the inner work. That's why it's also said, out of 1,000 who find me, one follows me. And the only one who truly follows the path by putting it into practice will be able to reach the third step, which is to balance the energy centers by applying psychological death, moment by moment, so that the defects no longer misuse the energy of those centers. Once you are actively working to balance your centers, the fourth step is to have a stable partner, someone with whom you can begin the practice of transmuting your sexual energy. It's important to understand that the internal bodies cannot be created without a partner. Creation is sexual, and outside of sex, nothing is ever created. So you need to find a partner who is also committed to this work, and who loves sexual practice. This path is serious, and it requires consistency and devotion. Also, it's essential that the sexual glands are in good condition. A castrated person cannot create the soul. Castration is a crime against the Holy Spirit, the Creator. If someone has been castrated, they must first regenerate themselves if that is possible. The fifth step is to turn the waters around. In other words, to raise the sexual energy up the spinal cord. To do this, we must stop fornicating and practice supersexuality correctly. That means avoiding orgasm and ejaculation, and instead learning to make the energy rise through the spine during sexual union. When you reach this point in your work, you may begin to see signs of it in the astral world. For example, you might see a waterfall flowing upward instead of down, a symbol that your energies are now rising. As you continue to balance your centers and work on eliminating the defects that block your chastity, you will begin the purification of your energy. The sixth step is to receive the silver sword. The work truly begins with chastity. We must understand the defect of fornication deeply and completely stop wasting our sexual energy. Only then will the sacred fire of the Kundalini begin to rise within the spine. So, we must work hard to eliminate all the subtle aspects of lust, because as long as fornication remains in us, no true spiritual progress can be made. Once that defect is eliminated, the sacred fire is awakened, and in the internal worlds, we are given a small silver sword with a white handle. This is a sign that we have become initiates, that we've begun the ascent of the fire, vertebra by vertebra, up the spinal cord. At first, this sword is very small, but it will grow as we advance in our initiations. However, every fall into fornication makes us descend 2 vertebrae. That's why chastity is absolutely essential on this path. Once we receive the silver sword in the astral world, we can say that we have officially begun the path. The 7th step is to pass through the 5 initiations of the major mysteries, which means beginning the creation of the existential bodies of the being. To create a body, we must first balance the 5 lower centers, just as we learned in Lesson 4. By saving energy through psychological death in daily life, and transmuting our sexual energy, including the sparks of liberated essence, we create each of the internal bodies. If someone works seriously and with continuity, the creation of each body can take around 2.5 years. Each initiation corresponds to the creation or completion of one of these bodies. In the first initiation, we regenerate the solar physical body. In the second initiation, we regenerate the solar vital body. In the third initiation, we create the solar astral body. In the fourth initiation, we create the solar mental body. And in the fifth initiation, we create the body of the solar will. Now, during the creation of this 5th body, we will encounter the 8th step, which is the moment of decision, the choice between 2 paths, the direct path or the path of nirvana. And here is where the saying is fulfilled. Out of 1,000 who follow me, one is mine. Because out of 1,000 initiates who reach this point, 999 choose the path of nirvana. They abandon the path of initiation and betray their inner father. But the one who chooses the direct path, that one walks the narrow and difficult road that leads us back to the bosom of our common cosmic Father. And finally, the 9th step is reached by those who choose the direct path. It is the moment of the perfect matrimony, the mystical union between the human soul, which consists of the 5 solar bodies, and the divine soul, which is represented by the 2 superior bodies. When we complete the 5th initiation, we become real men. A real man is someone who has fully developed his 5 lower bodies and brought them into a solar state. But right now, we are nothing more than rational animals, beings who have the potential, but haven't yet reached the full expression of it. When we reach this point, we can say that we have a human soul. The creation of the 5 solar bodies is called the first mountain, or the ascent of fire for the first time, from the coccyx to the pineal gland. It's also known as the fabrication of the human soul, or Genesis. The first mountain can take around 13 years of dedicated work, depending on the individual's level of effort and progress. As we complete each initiation, the sword we carry internally will grow. By observing the growth of our sword in the astral plane, we can track the progress of our work. The length of the sword represents the amount of fire in our spine. Each initiation begins and ends between two centers. Now that we understand the process for the soul's fabrication, let's talk about the spirit. Our spirit is formed by the higher parts of our consciousness. Let's see how the spirit fabricated. When the two souls, the divine soul and the human soul, unite in the perfect matrimony, the second triad is formed: Atman, Buddhi, and Manas. Manas is the human soul, Buddhi is the divine soul, and Atman is the intimate. Together, this triad is called the spirit. At this point, we will have completed our first mountain, the mountain of Genesis, and we will begin the second mountain, the mountain of the apocalypse, where the complete destruction of our ego will take place through fire. For the initiate who has chosen the direct path, they are given 1,000 years with the same physical body to ascend the second mountain, where the development of the spirit will occur. However, the second mountain can be completed in about 20 years with diligent work. On the second mountain, the 7 churches and the 7 consciousnesses, or 7 wisdoms, will fully develop. We will gain powers over the cosmos and acquire knowledge of the internal worlds of the planet, the solar system, and the galaxy. In the Phase B conferences, we will go deeper into the work on the mountains of initiation. That concludes today's topic. Please feel free to leave any questions you may have. We invite you to join us for the next conference, where we will discuss the laws of return and recurrence. In this session, we will explore the difference between return and reincarnation, delve into the concept of past lives, and uncover why déjà vu and premonitions occur. We will also talk about our destiny and how we can change it. Don't miss this fascinating topic. Until next time.